but Havlicek steals it. Havlicek stole the ball. Down goes Frazier. Down goes Frazier. Down goes Frazier.
Won their 6th NBA championship.
Gibson, swing. This is gonna be a home run. Unbelievable! Don't believe what I just saw.
Hello, I'm Chris Fowler for Sports Century. For 8 seasons, he patrolled the NBA forecourt like a top cop. Blessed with the power and speed of a running back, Alonzo Mourning used his natural gifts to the max in every game, on every play. On defense, the 6'10 center flashed through the paint to punish a penetrator and swept the boards like an avenging angel. With the ball, he was tough to stop, averaging 21 points a game. Then, in October of 2000, the 5-time All-Star was attacked from within by a deadly enemy that would challenge the deepest levels of his strength and resolve.
Zo was a beast, an absolute beast, and I say that in a very complimentary way.
Pat Riley's favorite expression of a guy like Zo is calling him a warrior. Guys who will give it their all, 100% on the court for that W. They don't care about stats, they care about victories. And Zo embodied that.
Now start out slow, baby. Let's hop right on.
He was an absolute effort player who had the biggest heart of any man that I've ever coached.
For his size, he's probably the hardest working guy who played that position in the NBA.
He was Bill Russell reincarnate. You couldn't drive the middle without Zo either getting the ball or getting a piece of you. And a lot of times he intimidated guys from driving around the middle because he knows he was going to put them on their butts.
Here's a guy that goes all out. He'd probably run his mother over if she had the basketball to get it from her.
He was very intense at all times on the court. He'd scream at himself. He'd scream at his other players. He was one of the most intense basketball players I'd ever seen.
I asked him, I said, so what do you think if someone who didn't know anything about you watched you in a game, just based on purely on your demeanor, what do you think that person's opinion of you would be as a human being? He says, a madman, an absolute crazy person who you wouldn't want to be around.
His competitive nature would not allow a lot of people to like him. He was not there to be liked. And I really don't want to fraternize you after the game because I got to play you again in 3 nights. So this does not lend itself to you being named Mr. Congeniality.
He played the villain. He was the guy with the scowl and the attitude. Zo was theatric, and there were always players in the league who thought that those weren't sincere theatrics, that it was a show, that he was trying to get in your head.
I remember early in his career he would go like this after a move. You know, those were the kinds of things that were turning people off, in a sense, about Zo the person.
He shows it in a way out there on the court where it's negative. And I was telling him, just calm down, calm down. Stop yelling at the ref.
Be careful, Zo. Put it aside, Zo. Oh, no. He just threw Alonzo Mourning out of the game.
One time, Vitaly Potapenko got him ejected from a game with a double technical. Pat Riley, after the game, goes in and tells the media that's Alonzo's fault. He has to know better. We go to Alonzo in the locker room. He was livid. He still didn't fully get it. The rage and the technicals and the anger, it took away from the player he could be.
The source of Alonzo Mourning's volatility is a passionate commitment so strong it has sometimes overpowered his judgment. Off the court, he stored that passion behind a scowl that the public perceived as arrogance.
Well, a lot of people will walk up to Alonzo and say, "Can I take a picture with you?" And Alonzo always said no. People will walk away and be cursing at him.
I walked up to Zo, I asked him a question. He turned and spent 5 minutes admonishing me about how inappropriate it was for me to ask that question at 11 o'clock in the morning on a game day. It would have taken him all of 30 seconds simply to answer the question and walk away.
How does it happen? I'm human. That's how it can happen. Next question. How does it happen?
He was never a kind of guy that walk in and had a big, huge grin on his face and running around saying hi to everybody and shaking hands and kissing babies. That was never him. He took life serious from the time he was able to remember. Life was no joke to him, and he didn't look at it as a joke.
There was a very frustrating part of the season where Zoe and I were clashing. Zoe said to me, "I want to talk to you after practice." Fine. And we spent 2 hours talking. He had to tell me about who he was, where he came from, what he was like. He said, "Man, I'm not proud of some of the things I did when I was a young man, how he was brought up and how he had gotten to this point in his life."
Born on February 8, 1970, Mourning was the only son of Alonzo Sr., a machinist in the shipyards of Portsmouth, Virginia. His mother, Julia, was a devout Jehovah's Witness. Tumultuous best described his parents' relationship.
A lot of times you just rebel to respond to any type of those circumstances. And that's what I did. There was a lot of rebellion there. And he had problems with me, and then there was counseling and therapy and all of that stuff.
His parents decided to divorce, and they asked him who he wanted to live with. And rather than make a choice and hurt one's feelings, he said he didn't want to live with either one of them.
And my gut was that I didn't want to be a part of any of that. Man, I love my family dearly, and so I stayed in the foster care system for a while.
When Alonzo was 11, he became a ward of the state of Virginia and lived in a group home with a dozen other children, some emotionally disturbed. A year later, Mourning's prospects brightened when Fanny and Bud Threet accepted him into their family.
When I came in the house and I saw Alonzo with my mom, she was holding him in her arms, and she was caressing him and making him feel comfortable and at ease.
One thing I liked about him, he just loved me. I don't know how in the world he loved me so.
I just looked at it as a new start, a new beginning for me. And from then on, I think my life just took off from there in a positive way.
Mourning, who was 6 feet in the 7th grade, focused on basketball. At Indian River High School, he led the team to 51 straight victories, including a state championship as a junior in 1987. As a senior, he averaged 25 points, 15 rebounds, and 12 block shots.
I remember walking away thinking, well, geez, he's way better than any center we have on the Kings right now.
Despite a barrage of college scholarship offers, Mourning was predisposed towards Georgetown, where the basketball program seemed ideally suited to his needs.
I knew that he was a kid that definitely was in search of the identity of the other part of his life.
There were so many things we were talking about, and a lot of times it wasn't even about basketball. We were talking about life.
As a freshman, Mourning's emergence as the nation's top shot blocker helped Georgetown win the Big East regular season and tournament titles. By emulating Coach John Thompson's hard-nosed manner, the 6'10 center came to symbolize a mindset that often beset the competition. It was known as Hoya paranoia.
John Thompson somehow instilled this chip right on these guys' massive shoulders, this angry chip. It's us against the world chip.
Everything John Thompson wanted him to do, he did to the fullest. I don't want you talking to anybody. Everything we do is intimidating. Alonzo had it down, dog.
But even while he followed Thompson's strict code of conduct, Mourning befriended a self-professed Hoyas fanatic named Rayful Edmond. It was a connection that would draw negative attention.
All of a sudden, the federal authorities were closing in on Edmond. And Alonzo kept popping up on tapes or photographs. Now he was being labeled an associate of one of the biggest drug kingpins in Washington, D.C.
It was guilt by association. I never did anything wrong. I was never involved in any type of unlawful things, but the damage had already been done, and I had to testify. And by me testifying, obviously, I'm petrified.
He was like, man, I could go to jail.
To protect Mourning, Thompson headed straight to the source.
John Thompson went and sought out Rayful Edmonds and told him, look, man, you got to stay away from my kid.
He had him come up to the Georgetown gym, and Coach said, look, I don't want you around my players. I understand what you do. That's your business. If you're a true fan of Georgetown, you would respect that. And he did.
In November of 1989, Mourning testified at Edmonds' trial, but was not implicated in any illegal activities. Edmond was found guilty of conspiracy and running what authorities said was Washington's largest cocaine ring. He was sentenced to life in prison. Back on the basketball court, Mourning had 2 more solid seasons before blossoming into an All-American as a senior. He led Georgetown to another Big East regular season title while earning the triple distinction of Conference Player of the Year, Defensive Player of the Year, and Tournament MVP.
When I graduated, my father, my biological father, he was there at the graduation. He went up to Big John and he told him, thank you for being there for my son.
I don't think that you can ever evaluate what a person accomplished at Georgetown until you see what he does with his life.
With the second pick in the 1992 NBA draft, the Mourning from Georgetown University.
Zoe was exactly the kind of player that every franchise hopes they can draft every 20 or 30 years.
After arriving in Charlotte in the fall of 1992, Alonzo Mourning was instrumental in the young franchise making its first playoff appearance.
The shot.
But the Hornets' promise of a strong future would be dashed by divisive forces from within.
Larry Johnson had established himself as a very powerful force in the locker room, and then here comes Alonzo, who is also very powerful, and I don't know that those two ever really meshed.
Well, it was very easy to gravitate to Larry. I mean, Larry could go in a room and he could light up the whole room. Alonzo, he was much more reserved.
There's a battle for the soul of the team, and they came at it from different directions. And maybe it was just inevitable that the way that those two played and the way their personalities were, that it was not going to be what it might have been.
In 1993, tensions mounted further when the Hornets awarded Larry Johnson an $84 million 12-year contract.
When it was Alonzo's turn to come around for his contract, the negotiations were much harder, were much longer. When negotiations broke down, then relationships broke down, and then it was just irreversible.
In 1995, after Mourning turned down the Hornets' final offer of $78 million over 7 years, he was traded to Miami, where his new coach, Pat Riley, welcomed him with an eager heart.
Pat Riley was a big man coach. He had played with Wilt Chamberlain. He had coached Kareem. He had coached Patrick Ewing. And now he gets Alonzo Mourning.
It was a perfect fit between a coach and a player that seemed to have the same type of attitude, the same type of aggressiveness, the same type of competitiveness. From day one when Zoe arrived, I think everybody felt this is going to work.
But he said to Pat Riley, Coach, how many games do you realistically think your team can win on this road trip? And Pat says, we want to win all of them. And then Zoe looked at me and he said, that's why I love the man. And we went out and won all 6 games.
4 on the shot clock. Zoe steps back. Yes!
What happened with Riley is that Alonzo's offensive game grew dramatically. Someone who could face the basket and shoot, someone who could score inside with a jump hook. He became a complete player.
In his second season at Miami, Mourning, armed with a $105 million 7-year contract, powered the Heat to a franchise record 61 victories in the Eastern Conference Final. A year later, the Heat met the Knicks in the first round of the 1998 playoffs. In the waning minutes of Game 4, Mourning and his former teammate, Larry Johnson, decided to settle old differences.
You see the two of them at the far end of the court, and you say to yourself, everyone thinks back, you know about the history in Charlotte, you know about the innuendo and their relationship, and you're just saying to yourself, those two guys shouldn't be standing together.
Between Mourning and Johnson. This could have huge ramifications on Sunday. Game 5 on Sunday.
Pat Riley screamed out, "No, Alonzo, no."
Mourning completely lost his cool. Pat Riley could not believe it. Can't believe it.
And when he walked off the court with Alonzo Mourning, you could see it in their face. They both knew that Alonzo Mourning had made the biggest mistake of his career.
I still have a visual image of Pat Riley with his arms and head pressed against the wall in the corridor, seeing that great opportunity slip away as it did.
That was the feeling that Alonzo still hasn't found it. You know, he still hasn't reached himself. He hasn't become what he needs to be a player who could be fierce and aggressive, but still under control when they need him to be.
With Mourning and Johnson suspended for Game 5, Miami dropped the deciding contest by 17 points.
Well, there's an old saying, until you change the way you look at things, those things that you look at will never change. And this made Zoe change. It really did.
You could see he felt he let his teammates down and had to focus his energy in a different way. And ever since that day, I could see a change in attitude on the court when it came to any extracurricular stuff.
It was the turning point for him. Opposing players had more respect for him, opposing coaches, the media. He started to become very accessible to people, and people started to really respect Zoe the person, not just Zoe the player. And that's when it all came together.
His wife told me that he would tell her, "Honey, I'll be home at noon." And she'd look at the clock because they had somewhere to go. And she'd go, "It's 12, he's not here." He comes in the house and she's just looking at him and he goes, "Had a bad day. I went and stopped by and visited foster homes and spend time with foster kids." That's how he wound down.
Samantha. Hey, lady. Hi, how are you? Oh, yeah, it's yours.
I think about all the people who played a role in my developmental process as a person and as a player. I look at all the things that were given to me. The giving made an impact on my life.
By 2000, Alonzo Mourning had changed himself into a respected community leader. While playing for the U.S. Olympic team in Australia, he celebrated the birth of his second child, a daughter. For perhaps the first time, Mourning's life was sailing through calm waters. But before the U.S. won its gold medal, Mourning felt sick. When he returned to Miami, he saw a kidney specialist.
I said, "What's the matter, doc? Tell me what's wrong." And he said, "Well, you have a kidney disease." He said, "It's very rare, but we can treat you, but there's no cure for it."
At 30, Mourning was diagnosed with focal segmental glomerulosclerosis, a disease that attacks the kidneys.
We were just scared, just terribly scared, and we thought we were going to lose him.
There was a time where I would just look at Alonzo and start crying, you know, just, and he would look at me like, "Could you stop it, please? You're not helping." But it was because I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to do.
I know you're going to be asking the questions about playing. Alonzo Mourning will not be playing professional basketball this season.
I put so much into this game for 20 years. And if you've done it for that long, man, you've done anything for that long, it's hard to just stop it. Just totally just shut it off. Just like just ripping a child away from his family.
Despite strong advice from doctors that he sit out the year, Mourning returned to the court late in the season.
I personally thought it was a mistake. We're talking about potentially a life and death situation, but Alonzo relegated my opinion to the sideline and pushed ahead with it.
He had this combative personality about wanting to compete and play that he actually probably jeopardized his health more than he realized by playing.
After his comeback season, Mourning suffered a relapse. His kidney disease forced him to miss the 2003 campaign. With his Heat contract expired, Mourning was a free agent. Seemingly healthy again, he signed with the Nets for $22.6 million over 4 years, only to be forced to the sideline after just 12 games.
Once you get into a certain level of kidney function, which is in the more advanced stages of failure, the kidney will continue to deteriorate. Once that happens, you say, okay, we have to make plans.
Right before the surgery, it was actually a pleasant feeling. And I knew if it didn't work out that, hey, I lived a great life. Been on this earth 34 years, and I lived an incredible life.
After a successful kidney transplant in December of 2003, Mourning returned to the game the following fall. But he and the Nets fell into a bitter dispute.
Alonzo Mourning, who was paid all last season by the Nets, despite the fact he played only a handful of games, that Alonzo Mourning wants a buyout from the Nets so he can join a team with a better chance to win an NBA championship, which he's obsessed with.
When Alonzo Mourning came back and rejoined the Nets, pretty much they had blown the team up. They decided to go in a different direction. Not a team capable of winning an NBA championship, and I think that's what Alonzo Mourning saw when he came back. He's obviously very disappointed. It was a tough time here. You know, things weren't going great for us, and it was very vocal, and it just stayed in the newspapers on a daily basis. You know, Zoe don't want to be here.
In December of 2004, Mourning was traded to the Raptors, but he didn't report, and Toronto eventually bought out his contract. The door to a satisfying reunion was open.
It took longer than expected, but some things are worth the wait, like, let's say, the return of Alonzo Mourning to Miami. He and the Heat reached a deal that brings the former Miami center back to his home of 8 seasons.
He ended up getting what he wanted. He paid for it. There's no doubt that he paid for it financially, but he's so desperate to win, and also he's in such a unique situation with going through the transplant that he's running out of time.
He's hoping that if this is the last time around in playing basketball, he finally gets his hands on that Larry O'Brien trophy.
This is ingrained in him from childhood, from being fostered under John Thompson and the Hoya paranoia, and it's something that we really saw when Pat Riley got a hold of him here with the Heat. It just molded something in Zoe that was already in him, and until he gets that ring, this thing is not going to be fed.
To me, whether he wins one or not is not going to change how I feel about him as a person, but I know it will give him a sense of peace.
During his battle with kidney disease, Alonzo Mourning drew comfort and inspiration from Lance Armstrong's autobiography, which chronicled the cyclist's remarkable recovery from cancer to win his first Tour de France. Lance kept his mind and his heart strong, said Mourning, and eventually his body caught up. Such was the power of will that also lifted Mourning back from the sidelines. For Sports Century, I'm Chris Fowler.